World leaders are converging on the United Nations just a few blocks from here, where President Trump, he's going to have his hands full when he heads there later this morning. NBC News is covering every angle of it all week long and around the world. Topic number one is likely Iran and the recent missile strike on Saudi Arabia, but also hanging over the president's head big time, the growing questions about his conversations with the leader of Ukraine. Back in D.C., the issue has some Democrats trying to ramp up talk of impeachment. President Trump now admits he did, in fact, talk to the Ukrainian president about Joe Biden and his son Hunter, although Mr. Trump denies pushing for any sort of corruption investigation and denies that he did anything wrong. But Democrats, they're skeptical and point to the administration's attempt to withhold a whistleblower's complaint as a possible indication that they have something to hide. Thursday is going to be a key day in all of this. That is the day the acting director of national intelligence, Joseph Maguire, is set to testify on Capitol Hill. On Sunday, Speaker Pelosi released an official letter demanding Maguire turn over the whistleblower's full complaint to the House Intelligence Committee. If he does not, she writes, the administration will be entering a grave new chapter of lawlessness, which will take us into a whole new stage of investigation. Some people believe that, quote, new stage means impeachment proceedings, something Pelosi has been resisting despite growing pressure from the rank and file. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff has said impeachment must be a last resort. But on Sunday, he said Democrats, they might be reaching a tipping point.
It may be that we do have to move forward with that extraordinary remedy. I have spoken with a number of my colleagues over the last week, and this seems different in kind, and we may very well have crossed the Rubicon here.
Let's dig deeper into this. Hans Nichols covering the president from the United Nations. Anna Palmer, senior Washington correspondent from Politico, the driving force behind their playbook. Anna, you wrote in Playbook that the president poured rocket fuel on the impeachment fire and that impeachment is coming more and more likely. What specific evidence do you have beyond rhetoric and fury that Democrats are getting closer?
Well, I do think it matters what happened yesterday, particularly Intel Chairman Schiff has been very hesitant, as you noted, to say that impeachment is a last resort. He moved on that substantially on air yesterday. And then you had the letter from Nancy Pelosi. She, as you said, has been trying very hard to stem the growing number of Democrats who want to move forward on impeachment. And she basically said this may be happening now. I think what we're going to be watching is what happens when these Democrats come back. Is there going to be a growing fervor? It definitely appears to us that there was a significant shift over the weekend among Democrats who have been hesitant to go down that direction and now feel like it's time.
When Rudy Giuliani is back in the media, Hans, that usually means there's something major to spin. At this point, what's the official response from the administration as far as it relates to impeachment?
Oh, well, as it relates to impeachment, Stephanie, we just heard from Stephanie Grisham this morning that they think this is all distraction. This is Democrats playing politics. The president's view on this is he can't be impeached because he thinks he's doing such a good job. It's not really a constitutional argument. It's more of a political one.
But
the bottom line, though, is the president
just
doesn't
quickly,
get.
Hans?
But the president doesn't get a vote on impeachment. You have to watch the Senate Republicans. And you heard Mitt Romney come out yesterday. You also heard Senator Cornyn down there in Houston. And Senator Cornyn said that Congress will look at it, but he's also towing the White House's line. So until you see movement from Senate Republicans, the president's going to remain in office. Steph?
Anna, what is your take on that argument, or how does Washington take to it? The president saying he's doing such a good job, impeachment isn't possible. Those two things don't have to be connected.
No, they don't. What's going to happen is the House Democrats need to move first. That's going to be their first step if they are going to impeach him. I think Hans is right to say that the Senate matters, what Senate leadership has. You certainly have not seen, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell say he's ready to move forward on this issue at all. So I think what you're going to start to see is the drumbeat of Democrats. Do they actually start the official proceedings? Jerry Nadler has wanted to do that for some time now, and it appears that we're going to be at a tipping point.
All right, here's the point where I get unrealistic or naive. Hans, any chance the administration actually hands over the whistleblower complaint or the transcript of the phone call?
Potentially. And I say that because the president himself said he's looking at some way to release part of it, or at least have a third party look at what might be releasable. So the president seems at least open to the idea. He didn't rule it out flatly. There was an acknowledgement from the president that the Bidens were discussed in his phone call with the president of Ukraine. Now, the president's line is, I know what real pressure looks like, and that wasn't pressure. But if there is any sort of transcript or any sort of information about this call released, it's ultimately Congress that will decide what sort of pressure was brought, was it appropriate, and is it impeachable? Steph?
All right, we got to get smarter on this. Thank you both. I have a fantastic group with me here this morning. Matt Miller, former chief spokesperson for the Justice Department. Joyce Vance, former U.S. attorney and professor at the University of Alabama School of Law. Steve Israel, former Democratic congressman from New York, as well as director of Cornell's Institute of Politics and Global Affairs. And Ryan Costello, former Republican congressman from the state of Pennsylvania. Congressman Israel, you worked with Speaker Pelosi. In June, you wrote that if she was going to move to impeach the president, she'd be waiting until the right time. Has the time changed at all? Could it be now?
Yeah, I think that we are, if not in a tipping point, very close to a tipping point. I spoke with many of my former colleagues over the weekend, and there is a change in sentiment. This just seems and sounds and appears different. The Democratic leadership, Stephanie, will apply a 4-point test to this, putting aside the constitutional issues and the substantive issues. On the politics, number one, can they get to 218 votes to impeach the president and send it to the Senate? Number two, can this be bipartisan? Right now, it's not bipartisan. The Nixon impeachment, the Clinton impeachment did have some bipartisanship. So will there be Republicans coming forward? Now, I think Pelosi's putting pressure on them. Number three, will the Senate convict him? Is there a reasonable chance of a Senate conviction? If not, you have an exonerated President Trump, which leads to number four. Does impeachment and an exoneration actually help reelect the president, and does it cost the Democrats their majority in the House? They're going to continue to focus on those four elements and make a decision in real time.
Congressman Costello, let's get real. Is there any possibility of bipartisanship? Mitt Romney, who has been critical of the president somewhat in the past, called this troubling in the extreme. I'd say that's the toughest rhetoric we've heard from the likes of Mitt Romney in quite some time.
Yeah,
Does it make a difference?
It's probably the toughest we've heard from a Republican to date. At this point in time, we have reports. We don't have the evidence. I do think it is an extremely interesting question on whether the administration turns over the report. If they don't, the political hot potato is still in the lap of House Democrats, and I don't know how they move forward with a hearing that lends itself to bipartisanship. That's not a critique of the Democrats in as much as it's a critique of the separation of powers and the fact that I think the executive branch is just going to clam up. To Steve's point about question number 4, which is the politics of this, and I just think if you're Democrats right now, this is not something, frankly, Democrats want to have to deal with, because it puts those 20 or 30 Democrats that do not want to vote for impeachment. They want this to go away. They know their Democratic voters don't like Trump. They wish Trump disappeared yesterday, but they're going to be forced to deal with something that they don't want to have to deal with. And as this unwinds, if it is as damning as some have reported, then it becomes really difficult for Democrats to ignore it. At that point in time, depending upon what is or isn't in there, then you may see Republicans say, I might support the president 9 times out of 10, but you cannot ask a foreign leader to do your political opposition research for you.
30, let me just say, 30 Democrats in districts that Donald Trump won, where he's still popular, about 40 Democrats flip Republican seats. So the pressure, to Ryan's point, is really on them.
All right, Joyce, take morality, honoring the office, doing the right thing, throw that out the window. If we believe all the reporting that the president did, in fact, pressure the leader of the Ukraine and may have held military over his head, if he did that, would that be breaking the law?
I think that there's no doubt that it would be breaking the law. It might be breaking a couple of different laws. There's a bribery statute that makes it a crime for a president to seek something of value in exchange for taking or withholding official action. And it looks like this would ring all of those bells. There may be others who were involved as co-conspirators or accomplices. It's really, I think, the most clear-cut situation, and maybe for the public, the most easy to understand situation involving this president's misconduct.
Matt, I want to share what the Wall Street Journal, owned by Rupert Murdoch, wrote in an editorial. There is a failure of Mr. Trump's critics to appreciate that to millions of Americans, this all looks like a Russian redux. That melodrama started with intelligence accusations and dubious unmasking of Americans that we later learned came from the Obama administration officials. That doesn't justify Mr. Trump's request, but it does explain why Republicans aren't joining the rush to judgment. What do you make of that argument?
Look, there are always people on the right who are going to make excuses for the president no matter what he does. Remember his famous claim that he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and his supporters would let him get away with it? I think the Wall Street Journal editorial page would be right there justifying it if he did. I think, but the reality of the situation is this looks so much. I think this actually looks different from the Russia investigation in a couple of ways, not just substantively, but also politically. I think when the Mueller report was finally produced in the spring of this year, to a lot of Americans, this was stuff that they had already become familiar with after years of reporting it, were events that largely occurred in 2017. They weren't happening in real time anymore, and they had been reported, and people had kind of, socialized it in their brains, and some people had even made peace with it, as hard as that is to believe. This is different. This is the president trying to act now to interfere in the upcoming election, to use the full authority of the United States government to benefit his reelection campaign. And I think for Democrats in Congress to sit aside, to stand aside and let him do that would not just open the door for him to abuse his authority in other ways, but sends a bad signal to other potential whistleblowers in the government, and sends a signal to voters that what the president is doing is okay. And I think not just would that be kind of a dereliction of their constitutional obligation, but I think it'd be political malpractice as well.
Congressman Costello, the New York Times says that there's an increasing number of Democrats who believe Republicans could pay a political price if, in fact, there is a vote on impeachment and those Republicans stand in line and protect the president.
So I don't agree with that, because at this point in time, to the Wall Street Journal editorial, it's not been presented verifiable that he's gone overboard here. And so there is an instantaneous belief that let's just let this play out amongst Republicans. I still think the political vulnerabilities here are on the Democratic side of the aisle with those 30. But things can change. I mean, depending upon what facts come out, depending upon what this looks like in a week or two. If you really wanted to talk about the political vulnerabilities here, it would be in the Senate, with 2 to 5 Republican senators who are in non-Trump states, or states that Trump is not likely to win in 2020. But not in. I don't see it in the House, not right now.
Congressman Israel, to that very point, are Democrats getting ahead of themselves, going so far on the impeachment? We don't actually know, beyond stories that have been reported in the news, what happened. And many Americans think that Democrats or news organizations got ahead of themselves in the conclusions they thought the Mueller report would give us. We don't actually know what the whistleblowers report or complaint is.
Well, that's exactly right. And that helps explain Nancy Pelosi's letter to all of her colleagues over the weekend saying we need that whistleblower report in order to make a judgment. Democratic caucus right now is of two minds. If you are representing a very progressive district, you go home and your base keeps telling you impeach, impeach, impeach. You want to impeach. But if you're one of those 30 or so Democrats in a district where when you go home, people are saying don't impeach, work on Medicare and work on crop issues and work on my economy, then you're not so willing to impeach. This is why the process that Speaker Pelosi has designed actually works. They're doing an impeachment inquiry. You know, you can make fun of what it sounds like, but it is an impeachment inquiry. They continue to pull at the threads, draw out facts, and then when the facts present themselves, meriting an impeachment.
Are they drawing out facts?
Oh, absolutely, yes. So you've got Jerry Nadler and the Judiciary Committee. You've got research being done. The problem is, as Adam Schiff said over the weekend, the administration is not respecting the constitutional oversight responsibility of the House and providing documents to this inquiry.
Totally,
and
as
Adam Schiff said,
knows that. But they're not paying any price for it. So why should they change their behavior?
The price is this, as Chairman Schiff said over the weekend. The courts are going to be slow and cumbersome, and if the Trump administration are going to use the courts to stop Congress's constitutional oversight responsibility, we may be looking more at an impeachment where you have to produce the evidence if you're in the administration.
Matt, I want to play a bit more of what the president said on Sunday. Listen to this.
The problem is, when you're speaking to foreign leaders, you don't want foreign leaders to feel that they shouldn't be speaking openly and good. You have to be talking to people. And the same thing for an American president. You want them to be able to express themselves without knowing that not every single word is going to be going out all over the world.
Matt, does the president have any point here?
Yeah, he does. Look, that is generally true. Generally, when presidents talk to foreign leaders, you want them to be able to have those conversations in private. But like all presidential privileges, those privileges have a breaking point. They have a point at which they yield. And I think the point at which they yield is when the president is abusing his office to benefit himself, to benefit his campaign, when he's potentially committing a crime. Typically, when courts have looked at executive privileges in the past, there has always been a point at which they yield to the need for Congress or for other actors to gather information. And I think that's true here. Look, in terms of what the president said, your question a minute ago, he has already admitted to talking to the president of Ukraine about Joe Biden. That's enough. That's the end. It doesn't have to be a quid pro quo.
Matt. It's enough for what? It might be offensive and outrageous, but for the last 3 years, people have been tearing their hair out over it, and there's no consequence. So the president can stick his tongue out, and he's still going to bed at the White House.
Yeah, that is absolutely right. But look, it is an abuse of his office that I think it's hard to overstate. Look, Stephanie, if I have asked you for a loan and you call me while that loan is pending and ask me 8 times for a favor, and then you send your lawyer to come talk to me, and ask me, to reiterate your request for the favor. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that there's a quid pro quo there, and you are abusing your your power.
Matt? If I still get the loan, but everybody thinks I'm a sleazebag, what do I care? I got the dough.
Well, I think that goes to the point that's why Democrats have to act aggressively here. And I think that because the president didn't pay any consequence in the past isn't an assurance that he won't in the future. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know how he's going to react. We don't know how the public's going to react. I think for Democrats in Congress, they need to move aggressively to police him because that's their responsibility.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.